real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
The Werewolf's Friend. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was 22, maybe 23 when I first saw the Dogman. The memory burns as clear now as it did 40 years ago. Clearer, maybe, like some things get when you're staring down your own mortality. I've been setting up camp in this forgotten hollow deep in the Pennsylvania hills, the kind of place that doesn't appear on any tourist maps, where the old-growth trees still whisper secrets from before the loggers came through. The sun had just dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky that particular shade of purple that makes you believe in magic, when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. At first I figured it was just shadows playing tricks. You know how twilight can make ordinary things look otherworldly. But something in my gut, some primal alarm system we've carried since our cave-dwelling days, started screaming that this wasn't ordinary at all. I was crouched beside my tent, wrestling with a stubborn stake, when the feeling hit me like a physical weight. That sensation of being watched, studied, evaluated. The kind of attention that makes every hair on your body stand up. I froze, stake still in my hand, and slowly turned toward the tree line, about 30 yards away, and that's when I saw him. He stood between two massive oaks, motionless as a statue, but alive in a way that made the very air around him seem to hum with electricity. My first thought, the one that bypassed my rational mind entirely, was that I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. It was too tall to be a bear, easily 7 feet, maybe 8. It was too upright. It was too purposeful to be anything I'd ever encountered in all my years of camping and hiking. But it was the face that was the most shocking part. When I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on, the beam caught his eyes first, intelligent, golden, reflecting the light back like twin moons, and then I caught sight of the rest of his features. Elongated snout, pointed ears that swiveled toward me with laser focus, but set on a skull that was almost too human in its proportions. His body was covered in thick dark fur that seemed to absorb the flashlight beam, muscular in a way that spoke of raw, untamed power. We stared at each other across that hollow. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight steady, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. Every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to run, to drop everything and sprint down that mountain as fast as my legs could carry me. But there was something else. Something that kept me rooted to that spot even as my rational mind cataloged all the reasons I should be terrified. His eyes held something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not hunger, but curiosity, maybe even uncertainty. Like he was as surprised to find me as I was to encounter him. The moment stretched between us, taut as a bowstring, until finally he took a single step backward, and then another. Within seconds he'd melted back into the forest so completely that I might have convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, if not for the way my heart was still beating, and if not for the way my hands were still shaking. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound the forest made around me. Little did I know, that encounter was just the beginning of the most extraordinary month of my life. Here I sit now around 40 years later, in this recliner that's become more familiar than my own bed. The illness, or whatever the hell this is that's eating me from the inside, has turned me into a scarecrow version of my former self. 6 months ago I was still Martha's sturdy husband, still the guy who could split a cord of wood in an afternoon and carry groceries up from the car without even breaking a sweat. But now look at me. My hands, resting on the arms of this chair, look like they belong to my grandfather. All knobby knuckles and liver spots, skin so thin you can see every vein beneath. The wedding ring Martha slipped on my finger 35 years ago slides around loose now, threatening to fall off entirely. I've lost 50 pounds in half a year, and most of it seems to have melted away overnight, like I aged a decade in the span of a week. Martha tries to hide her worry, but I catch her watching me when she thinks I'm not looking. The way she sets down my tea just a little too carefully, like I might shatter if she makes too much noise. The forced brightness in her voice when she asks how I'm feeling today. We both know the answer to that question, so why even keep asking? The doctors have their theories, their tests, their carefully worded explanations about aggressive cellular changes and treatment options. But sitting here in the growing dusk, watching the shadows lengthen across our suburban lawn, I found myself thinking less about medical terminology and more about that month in the Pennsylvania hills when I was young and strong and faced with wonder instead of with weakness. Maybe it's the proximity to my own ending that's dragged these memories to the surface. Or maybe it's just that when you're stripped down to your essential self, when the pretenses and daily distractions fall away, you start to see which experiences actually mattered, which moments were real, and which were just time passing. That 1 month changed everything about how I understood the world, yet I spent the next 4 decades pretending it didn't happen. Now with mortality breathing down my neck, I can't stop thinking about the road I didn't take, the life I chose not to live, about my old friend in the forest, and whether he ever wondered what became of the nervous young man who shared his territory for those precious weeks when anything seemed possible. I had planned the month-long solo camping trip for the better part of a year, saving every spare dollar from my college job to afford the gear and to afford the time away. Central Pennsylvania's forgotten hills called to me like nowhere else, far enough from civilization that you could go days without seeing another soul, wild enough that anything seemed like it could happen. Those first few nights after our initial encounter were like a chess match between 2 players who didn't know the rules. The Dogman would circle my camp after dark, just beyond the reach of my campfire's glow. I'd catch glimpses of movement. I'd hear the soft pad of enormous feet on pine needles, and sometimes I'd spot those golden eyes reflecting back the light from the campfire. During the day, it was my turn to be the watcher. I'd spot him across ridgelines, always maintaining that careful distance. Once I found massive paw prints in the mud near the creek, easily twice the size of any dog print I'd ever seen, with claw marks that suggested power that I didn't want to think about too closely. We were both territorial creatures, trying to figure out what the other one wanted. I'd wake with my heart pounding, knowing that he'd be close by when I slept. My rational mind kept insisting I should pack up and leave, find some other wilderness to explore. But something deeper, something more primal, whispered in my head, and this was the adventure I'd been seeking, without even knowing it. By the 4th night, our dance of mutual surveillance had settled into an almost comfortable routine. He'd appear at the edge of my firelight, around 9 o'clock, settle on his haunches like some enormous impossible dog, and then he'd just watch me. I would talk to him sometimes, nervous chatter at first, and then longer observations about the weather, the forest, my fumbling attempts at wilderness cooking. He never responded, of course, but his ears would swivel toward my voice, and I swear there were moments when something almost like amusement flickered across those intelligent dog features. We were sizing each other up, 2 very different species, trying to decide if the other posed a threat worth worrying about. The breakthrough came on my 6th day, when bad creek water laid me flat with food poisoning that had me crawling to the bushes every hour. Fever hit me like a sledgehammer, leaving me shivering in my sleeping bag, while the world spun around me like a broken carnival ride. I drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days, barely able to keep water down, let alone venture far from my tent. Somewhere in the haze of fever dreams and nausea, I became aware that my mysterious neighbor had changed his behavior. Instead of maintaining his usual distance, he seemed to be lingering closer, those periodic glimpses more frequent. When I finally crawled out of my tent on the 3rd morning, weak as a newborn baby but no longer actively dying, I found things that hadn't been there before. A plastic water bottle I'd lost 2 days earlier was now cleaned and filled with what tasted like sweet spring water. Beside it, arranged with deliberate care, were several roots I didn't recognize but somehow knew were safe to eat. My hands shook as I examined these gifts, because that's what they were, gifts from someone who'd been watching me suffer and decided to help. The roots were bland but filling, and whatever was in that water seemed to settle my churning stomach better than anything from my first aid kit could do. That afternoon, still wobbly but mobile, I made my way to the creek for the first time in days. He was there when I arrived, crouched at the water's edge, drinking. This time, when our eyes met across the flowing water, neither of us looked away or retreated. The moment stretched between us, electric with possibility, until finally he rose to his full impressive height and melted back into the forest. But something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. He'd shown me kindness when I was vulnerable, and somehow that changed everything. What followed afterward were 3 weeks that redefined everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. Our meetings became daily rituals, each one building on the trust we tentatively established by the creek. He'd appear around sunset, emerging from the tree line with that grace that somehow his size had no right to possess. At first he'd settle about 20 feet away, close enough that I could see the individual whiskers on his muzzle, the way his ears constantly swiveled to track sounds that I couldn't even detect. Gradually, the distance shortened. He seemed fascinated by my campfire, tilting his head at the way I arranged the logs, watching intently as I cooked my simple meals. I started preparing extra food, nothing fancy, just beans from a can or instant oatmeal, and leaving portions at the edge of my camp. They'd be gone by the morning, although I never saw him take them or eat them. The real breakthrough came when I started playing my battery-powered radio softly in the evenings. His reaction was immediate and unmistakable, those pointed ears snapping to attention, his head cocking at angles that would have been comical if the situation weren't so extraordinary. Classical music seemed to mesmerize him completely, but he showed obvious distaste for anything with heavy percussion, retreating several steps whenever rock songs came on. During the day he began showing me things. Not directly, he was too cautious for that, but I'd find myself following game trails that led to hidden springs, or discovering caves I never would have noticed on my own. Sometimes I'd catch sight of him ahead on the path, pausing just long enough to make sure I was following, before disappearing around the next bend. He taught me which plants were safe by demonstrating, munching thoughtfully on certain berries or roots while I watched from a respectful distance. When I tried the same plants later, they were always edible and often delicious. It was like having the world's most unusual wilderness guide, one who communicated entirely through example and through patience. The strangest part was how natural it all began to feel. Within a week, his presence at my evening campfire seemed as normal as watching the sunset. We'd developed our own rhythm, our own unspoken understanding of boundaries and of trust. By the third week, something that could only be called friendship had bloomed between us. The wariness was gone, replaced by genuine companionship that transcended the impossible barrier between our species. The morning he led me to his den was the moment I truly understood how completely he'd come to trust me. I was gathering firewood when he appeared beside me, not emerging from the forest as usual, but simply there, like he'd been waiting. He looked directly into my eyes, and then he turned and began walking deeper into the hills with obvious purpose. I followed without question, hiking for nearly an hour through terrain I'd never seen before, until we reached a rocky outcropping honeycombed with caves. He paused at the entrance to one, looking back at me with an expression that seemed almost nervous. And then he went inside. The soft sounds that drifted out made my breath catch. Playful yips, tiny growls that could only mean one thing. When he emerged a few minutes later, 2 cubs tumbled out behind him, all legs and oversized paws, and boundless curiosity about the strange visitor that their father had brought home. They were beautiful in a way that made my chest tight, miniature versions of their dad, but with the fearless enthusiasm of the young. One actually approached close enough that I could have reached out and touched the fur on its head, though some instinct warned me not to push that particular boundary. We spent the entire afternoon there, the cubs playing while their father and I sat in companionable silence, watching the sun track across the sky. In that moment, I felt more connected to the natural world than I ever had before or since. Here was trust beyond anything I'd imagined possible. A wild creature sharing his most precious secrets with someone from an entirely different world. That evening, for the first time, he walked me all the way back to my camp. As I built my fire, he settled closer than ever before, near enough that I could hear his breathing. I could smell the wild, earthy scent of his fur. When a thunderstorm rolled across the valley that night, we sat together and watched nature's light show. Two very different beings finding common ground in wonder at forces greater than ourselves. I knew then that leaving would be one of the hardest things I ever had to do. The last morning arrived like a death sentence. College started in 3 days, and my parents expected their responsible son to show up with his priorities straight and his future mapped out in neat, predictable lines. I packed my gear with hands that felt as heavy as lead. Every rolled sleeping bag, every single packed item, another step away from the most authentic life I'd ever lived. He watched from the tree line, and I swear there was something heartbreakingly human in those golden eyes. Understanding, maybe even pleading. When I shouldered my pack and turned toward the trail that would take me back to the world of schedules and expectations, he stepped forward. For one wild moment, I thought he might try to stop me, might offer some sign that I should stay. But instead, he did something that nearly broke my resolve entirely. He approached within arm's reach, the closest that he'd ever come to me, and he gently pressed his massive head against my chest. I could feel his warmth through my jacket. I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. My hand rose instinctively to rest between his ears, my fingers tangling in fur softer than I'd imagined. We stood like that for what felt like hours, two friends saying goodbye, in the only way our species allowed. When he finally stepped back, I saw my own grief reflected in his eyes. I walked away without looking back, because I knew if I turned around, I would never leave those hills. Here I sit writing this, 40 years of spreadsheets and suburban lawns stretching between me and this story I'm telling you. It's like a prison sentence I imposed on myself. Martha's a good woman. My kids turned out fine. But sitting here in this recliner, I can't shake the feeling that I traded magic for normalcy. Every outdoor magazine I ever read, every nature documentary that shows researchers making groundbreaking discoveries, they send a knife through my chest. That could have been me. Probably should have been me. Instead, I chose the safe path, the expected path, the path that led to everything I thought I wanted, but not what my soul actually needed. The worst part is not what I lost. It's what the world lost. How many others are out there, waiting for someone brave enough to bridge the gap between species? If I had stayed in those woods, if I had found the courage to document our friendship, maybe everything would be different now. Maybe the Dogman would be in textbooks instead of cryptid forums. Maybe there'd be protected habitats, research programs, understanding instead of fear. I imagine the papers I could have written, the footage I could have captured, the bridge I could have built between two worlds that rarely touch. Instead, the scientific community remains skeptical, while creatures of extraordinary intelligence hide in our remaining wild places, unknown and unprotected. My 1 month of friendship could have changed how humanity understands its place in the natural world. Instead, it just remains my secret, as hidden as the Dogman himself. The illness seems to be winning most days now, and I find myself wondering if he is still out there in those Pennsylvania hills. Does the Dogman remember the strange young human who shared his territory for one remarkable month? Does he ever look toward the distant glow of cities and wonder what became of his unlikely friend? I hope he enjoyed a long, full life surrounded by his family. I hope our friendship meant as much to him as it did to me, even though I was too much of a coward to honor it properly. Maybe in whatever comes after this, I'll someday find those hills again. Maybe I'll get a second chance to choose wonder over safety. magic over mediocrity. Until then, I carry my 1 month together with the Dogman like a secret flame, the only truly authentic experience of my entire life. He's never often, always on. He's today's EP, John Carnagan. Please join me in thanking John Carnagan for recently donating to us through YouTube and making this episode possible. We really couldn't survive without your donations and your memberships. And here to explain more about all that is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank!
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.